Being a Bills fan does not feel calm. It feels loud, it feels tense, and it feels like we're standing at one of those moments where the franchise can either level up or waste another year of Josh Allen's prime. Because over the last few days, two different stories dropped about this team. And at first, they seem separate. But the more you sit with them, the more you realize they're actually connected to the same exact question every Bills fan has been asking. Are we finally about to push all the chips in? Or are we still hesitating? Something big is clearly being discussed behind the scenes. Something that could change the identity of this roster. Something that tells us what this new era of Bills football is really about. And depending on how it goes, it could either light a fire under this team or make a lot of people even more frustrated than they already are. I'm not going to spoil it yet. But one story is about how aggressive this front office might be willing to get. And the other one? That one hits directly at the biggest weakness we all watched every single Sunday. If you're a real Bills fan, this stuff matters. A lot. Before we dive into it, real quick, if you love honest Bills talk, no fluff, no sugarcoating, go ahead and drop a like and subscribe. This channel is brand new. We're trying to hit our first 1,000 subs, and if you bleed red, white, and blue, like I do, you're gonna feel right at home here. All right, now let's really get into this first story. Because this one says a lot about where this franchise is headed and how much pressure is on Buffalo Bills right now. This offseason has already been wild. The front office made the massive call to move on from Sean McDermott, a guy who was basically the face of this era of Bills football. And let's be real, that decision didn't sit well with everybody. Some players didn't love it. A chunk of the fan base didn't love it either. But once you make that move, there's no halfway anymore. You're committed. Then the team promotes Joe Brady to head coach, and suddenly everything accelerates. Brady comes in and immediately reshapes the staff, bringing in Jim Leonhard as defensive coordinator, Pete Carmichael Jr. to run the offense, and Jeff Rodgers handling special teams. That alone tells you this team is not trying to tread water. This is a reset with urgency, and that's where Brandon Beane comes in. Look, the Bills have holes, real ones, and we all know the two biggest, pass rusher and wide receiver. You can talk yourself into the draft all you want, but this roster is in win-now mode. Josh Allen is in his prime. The margin is thin, and Beane knows it. That's why these four potential blockbuster trades being floated actually make a scary amount of sense. Let's start with the one that would shake the entire league. Max Crosby. Things completely fell apart for the Las Vegas Raiders last season. Full-on disaster. And it ended with real tension between Crosby and the organization. He was forced to sit out the final 2 games, and he wasn't quiet about it either. Now the Raiders are heading into a total rebuild, and Crosby is easily their best asset. And from a Bills perspective, he's almost too perfect. In a new 3-4 defense, he could line up as an outside linebacker or edge rusher and immediately become the most dangerous pass rusher this team has had in years. Pass rush has been the Bills' Achilles heel forever, and Crosby, even in what people called a down year, still had 10 sacks. 10. That would have led the Bills by 3 last season. And he's only 28 years old. This isn't another past his prime swing like Von Miller was. This would be getting a legitimate, in his prime disruptor who could dominate for the next 3 or 4 seasons. Honestly, this would be the first truly impactful pass rusher Buffalo has brought in over a decade. That's franchise-altering stuff. Now, on the offensive side, this is where things really hit close to home. A.J. Brown. We all watched the passing game last season. Yeah, the offense ranked high statistically, but anyone with eyes could see the problem. Receivers weren't separating, timing was off. Everything felt harder than it should with a quarterback like Josh Allen. If the internal belief is that wide receiver is the top priority, and it sure feels that way, Brown is the kind of move that screams championship window. He was visibly unhappy with the Philadelphia Eagles at times. Cryptic tweets, body language on the sideline. You could tell something wasn't right. And honestly, the Bills have experience handling big personalities at receiver. They got the absolute best years out of Stephon Diggs. Even in a down season, Brown still put up 78 catches, 1,003 yards, and 7 touchdowns. That's the floor. He'd instantly become Allen's true alpha target. Someone who can win deep, dominate after the catch, and fit perfectly into Brady's short yardage passing concepts. Is this the smartest move 3 years from now? Maybe not. But the goal isn't 3 years from now. The goal is the next 2 seasons. This is the type of move that could put Allen back in MVP conversations without him having to play superhero every single snap. Then there's the more calculated gamble. Jermaine Johnson from the New York Jets. This one's interesting. Johnson lost almost all of 2024 to an Achilles injury and dealt with ankle issues in 2025. That's scary, no denying it. But when he's healthy, the athleticism jumps off the screen. In a base 3-4, he can stand up and rush, and his 2023 production, 7.5 sacks and 16 pressures, shows how disruptive he can be. Now that he'd be a full year plus removed from the Achilles, there's a real belief he could break out in the right system. And because the Jets are in full rebuild mode, this is the kind of move where the Bills might not have to completely mortgage the future. A couple of picks could potentially get it done. Risky? Yeah, but calculated. And finally, the young receiver with massive upside. Brian Thomas Jr. Back in 2024, this guy looked like the next superstar. As a rookie with the Jacksonville Jaguars, he put up 87 catches, 282 yards, and 10 touchdowns. That's elite. Then 2025 hits, and everything stalls. Just 48 catches, 707 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Drops early in the season hurt him. He started losing targets to Parker Washington and Jacoby Myers from Trevor Lawrence. And with Travis Hunter coming back from injury, that receiver room suddenly feels crowded. Jacksonville isn't desperate to move him, so it would cost real assets. But he's young, on a rookie deal, already has 1 monster season on his resume, and playing with Josh Allen could absolutely unlock him again. Long-term, this might actually be the cleanest fit. And here's the bottom line. The Bills can't just sit back and hope the first-round pick saves them. Not anymore. This is not the time for patience. That pick, and probably next year's too, should be on the table for a true difference maker right now. Brandon Beane needs to prove himself in this new era, and landing any one of these 4 guys would quiet a lot of doubters fast. But here's the thing. While everyone's talking about all these hypothetical blockbuster options, there's another wide receiver situation quietly developing that might completely change how aggressive Buffalo really gets. And that's where this next story comes in. All right, now let's talk about the second story. Because this one feels like it's flying a little under the radar, but it might actually be more realistic than some of those blockbuster names we just talked about. For months now, the Bills have been loosely connected to A.J. Brown, and for good reason. He's elite, he's proven, and his situation in Philadelphia has been tense all season. But here's where things get interesting. There's another wide receiver who might be on a collision course with Buffalo, and it might cost a lot less. That's Brandon Aiyuk. According to reports, the San Francisco 49ers and Aiyuk are headed toward a full-on divorce this offseason. Things went south between the player and the organization, and it wasn't subtle. The breaking point? His rehab from a torn ACL that wiped out his season. The 49ers ended up voiding his guarantees after a rift formed over how that rehab was handled. Once guarantees are gone, that's not just tension, that's a relationship basically beyond repair. And this is where Buffalo comes in. The Bills still desperately need a true number one receiver. And Alex Ballantyne from Bleacher Report straight up said that while Brown would be the preferred target, an Aiyuk trade would likely cost significantly less in draft capital, while still fixing a massive weakness on this roster. Ballantyne also made an important point about where Buffalo is internally right now. He mentioned that Keon Coleman still has time to develop into the player the Bills hoped he'd be. But time is the problem. The pressure is on in Buffalo right now. And Josh Allen needs a legitimate number one receiver. Someone who can create separation, win one-on-one, and not need everything to be perfect to make a play. And when you look at the current receiver room, it's rough. The Bills' wide receiver group is honestly one of the weakest in the league. Khalil Shakir is a solid complementary piece, but on most teams, he's not a top option. Yet here, he's one of Josh Allen's primary targets. Then you've got Brandon Cooks, who's 32 years old and at this point has become a journeyman. Down the stretch, things got even uglier. Joshua Palmer, Tyrell Shavers, and Gabe Davis all ended up on the injured list. That just exposed how thin this group really is. And even when everyone is healthy, there's still no true number one. There's no guy you can point to and say, yeah, that's the dude who's winning contested catches, getting open on his own, and drawing coverage every snap. Palmer and Davis, who are arguably the two best receivers on the roster right now, wouldn't be number ones or even number twos on most teams. Shakir projects more like a number four, and Cooks would struggle to consistently see the field on a contender. That's the reality. Now imagine dropping either Aiyuk or A.J. Brown into that room. Instantly, everything changes. They become Josh Allen's top option. Coverage shifts. Roles make sense again. Guys stop being asked to do things they're not built to do. And the offense gains an entirely new dimension without Allen having to play hero ball every week. Aiyuk might not have Brown's name value, but if the cost is lower, especially with the 49ers relationship already fractured, this is the kind of move that feels very Brandon Beane-coded, aggressive, but calculated. And when you step back and look at both stories together, the trades being floated, the pressure on the front office, the receiver desperation, the championship window staring everyone in the face. Yeah, this doesn't feel like a normal offseason at all. It feels like a decision point. And how the Bills handle this moment is going to tell us everything about what kind of era we're walking into next. And that's really the big picture here. Bills Mafia. When you put both of these stories together, it tells you exactly where this franchise is standing right now. On one side, you've got Brandon Beane being openly linked to massive franchise-shifting trades. Pass rushers, true number one receivers, real stars. On the other side, you've got the brutal reality of this roster, especially at wide receiver, being exposed for what it is. Not good enough to maximize Josh Allen when it matters most. This isn't about panic. And it's not about fantasy football trades either. This is about timing. Josh Allen is still in his prime. The coaching staff has been completely reset. The defense is being reshaped. The offense is trying to find its identity again. And the front office knows it doesn't have the luxury of waiting 3 years for draft picks to maybe work out. That's why names like Max Crosby, A.J. Brown, Brandon Aiyuk, and even younger upside swings keep coming up. These aren't moves for comfort. These are moves that scream urgency. And honestly, that's a good thing. Because standing pat right now would be the worst possible message to send. It would say the Bills are hoping instead of acting. And hope doesn't win championships in this league. So, whether Bean pulls the trigger on a true blockbuster or makes a slightly quieter but smarter move like Aiyuk, one thing is clear. This team has to come out of this offseason different than it went in. More dangerous, more balanced, and finally built to take some of the weight off Josh Allen's shoulders. As a fan, I'm excited. But I'm also watching closely. Because this feels like one of those moments we'll look back on and say, yeah, that's when everything changed, for better or worse. And now I want to hear from you. If you enjoyed this kind of real, honest Bills talk, hit that like button and drop a comment with what move you want Bean to make. This channel, Bills Nation Update, is brand new. We're chasing our first 1,000 subscribers. And if you're a Bills fan who appreciates straight-up opinions from someone who lives this team every day, subscribe and ride with us. Bills Mafia. This offseason is just getting started.